Hi, RMA friends. Hey, we really appreciate you attending today's event. We know you have a lot of choices. There's a lot of choices for online webinars. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. RMA, just to talk about them for a minute, the national and what we're doing there. In addition to the credit risk, there's a lot of other topics that we've been covering lately. There's talent and succession management, cyber risk, strategic risk from a tech disruption perspective, geopolitical risk, the risk of using third parties, the LIBOR replacement risk, climate risk, just to name a few. There's over 10,000 people have attended our COVID webinars in the last year. Over 35,000 people get the RMA Insider newsletter, which is kind of an industry, insider perspective about what's going on in regulation and risk management. And literally over 100,000 people have downloaded and listened to RMA podcasts. So Jan, in a moment, will talk to you about how to tie into some of those resources. But before I turn it over to her, I just wanted to thank our sponsors. We had almost 100% renewal this year in our sponsors. And, it's a difficult time for sponsors. We're not getting together. It's just been difficult. So we really wanted to thank our group of sponsors, many of which have been with us for quite a while. If you wouldn't mind, when you get a minute, just check our website, rmaoc.org, and take a minute and check in with these folks. Just see how they're doing. Send them a piece of business, if you can. But again, thank you so much to the sponsors, all the sponsors, and we have a couple for our event today. But before we do that, I wanted to go ahead and turn it over to IB to talk about how to tie into all these resources that RMA has.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. And thank you, all of you who have are joining us today for this great presentation by Dr. Jon Haveman. We're excited to have you. If you're not a member of RMA currently, please consider joining. If your goal in 2021 is to expand your network of like-minded professionals, then RMA Orange County is really the group for you. As John pointed out, there are so many benefits that even in this age of operating virtually, we have access to opportunities for career development and growth, access to great educational items, peer dialogue. So there's just so much that a membership provides for you. We also have a special where if your institution, your bank institution, is currently a member, you are able to join for a very, very low cost. But our special is we're going to pick up the cost. So if you have interest in joining, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions and direct you to the place to join up and become a member. So appreciate it. And please consider joining. Now I'm going to hand it off to Steve Castleberry, and Steve is an attorney with Music Peeler. Steve?
Great, thank you, Jan. Really appreciate it. As Jan indicated, and many of you know me and know the firm, I am a partner at Music Peeler. Although we are a full service firm, I chair the financial services department, which is the group that works with banks, lending institutions, and similar type products. So I have had the pleasure of being on the board for almost 10 years now. Surprisingly, they haven't thrown me off yet, but I'm still here. So Music Peeler has been a platinum sponsor during substantially all of this time, and we've To echo Jan's comments a few minutes ago, we've had some great success in being a member of RMA, even since we were not a financial institution. So we very much appreciate the organization and believe that it's a very solid one for people to consider if you're not already a member. As a financial services a partner for Music Peeler, we handle all things that are important to financial institutions and similar type companies. So many of you know me and have seen me around at various things. So feel free to reach out if there's anything that we can help you out with, or if there's anything that we can get you referred on to someone else in the industry, we're happy to do so. So again, thank you, RMA, for allowing Music Peeler to be a sponsor today. We very much appreciate it. And now at this point, I want to turn it over to Tricia, who's representing our co-sponsor. And Tricia, you want to take it from here?
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everyone. Supporting RMA was just a natural partnership from us, since we're both focused on managing risk. So we're just delighted to be a sponsorship this year. As said, my name is Tricia Dow. I've been in the commercial insurance world for 25 years, both the carrier side and the broker side. I joined actually Barney & Barney 9 years ago. And a few short years later, we were acquired by Marsh McLennan Agencies. And there's always a lot of confusion over who's Marsh and who's Marsh McLennan Agencies. So just a brief history. Marsh organization is global. They're Fortune 100 focused, but always wanted to get into the middle market. So decided the best strategy to do that would be form Marsh McLennan Agencies. And then they began selecting and acquiring the top brokers in the country. And we were the first West Coast acquisition and then became Marsh McLennan Agencies. We're now actually the leading segment in the Marsh organization, and we attribute that to two things. We were successful at merging the complexities of global resources and the local touch of a neighborhood broker, and it has proven to be a real recipe for success. We've enjoyed 15% growth each year organically, and just are really enjoying what we're seeing as kind of a flight to quality due to some of the complexities that Jon mentioned earlier. Businesses are finding they need more from their insurance brokers than just policies. And so we're kind of enjoying this, what we call flight to quality. And secondly, our focus, not to add anything more to the world problems, but we're in the worst insurance market we've been in for 25 years. And I'm sure you've heard from your clients and colleagues some really difficult stories. So the ability to use those global resources and have the strategic planning to help our clients through that has just really helped contribute to our success. So I look forward to meeting you all and to the time when we can all be together again. Thanks so much. Back to you, Scott.
Good morning. Welcome. So we have an excellent speaker today. His name is Dr. Jon Haveman. He's the Executive Director of the National Economic Education Delegation. He's a noted California economist where he's been practicing since about 2001. He has a reputation for providing audiences with edible economic information that is readily useful in their work and private lives. So Dr. Haveman holds a PhD and a Master's of Science in Economics from the University of Michigan and a Bachelor of Science in Economics from the University of Wisconsin. We're really proud to introduce him today and look forward to what he has to say about COVID economics. Take it away.
Well, thanks so much, Scott. Thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me to be here. I will be talking about COVID and the economy. Before I get there, I'd like to say just a word or two about NEED, which is a relatively new organization. I founded NEED about 3 years ago as a nonpartisan nonprofit designed to increase economic policy literacy among the electorate. right? I've been a professional economist for a very long time now. And over the course of those years, I've found that politicians are increasingly using economics as a weapon for their own personal agenda rather than a tool for social good. And I figure they get away with that because the electorate just doesn't know very much about economic policy. And the responsibility for that I put squarely on the shoulders of the economics profession, because we know a ton about economic policy. We just don't tell anybody. We'll publish it in esoteric journals that nobody reads and then move on. So NEED is an effort to get economists out in the wild, again, in a very nonpartisan way, telling people what we know about economic policy issues. I've gotten a lot of buy-in from the profession. We have an honorary board with 53 members, in particular Janet Yellen, who may well be in Senate hearings right now for her confirmation as our incoming Secretary of the Treasury, and Ben Bernanke, the former chair of the Federal Reserve. We've got 6 former chairs of the President's Council of Economic Advisors in a nonpartisan way, both from R&D presidents, Republican and Democrat, and some Nobel Prize winners. We also have about 600 members of the delegation. Those are people who are trying to help us write slide decks to give talks and to go out and give talks. All of our slide decks. So if 2 of us go out to speak on COVID economics, we'll both be using the same slide deck that will be written by a pair of or a couple of subject matter experts. They're also reviewed by subject matter experts, one identifiably liberal and one identifiably conservative, to make sure that the decks are put together in a nonpartisan way. All right, here's a list of other topics that we speak on. If you're a member of some organization, or if the RMA would like NEED to come in and give another talk on one of these issues, be happy to set that up. Okay, so on to COVID. So this deck was authored by 4 of us, myself, Scott Beyer, the chair of the economics department at Clemson University, Jeffrey Woglum, emeritus from Amherst College, and Brian Dumbuck from Lewis and Clark College up in Oregon. So what am I going to talk about with regard to COVID and the economy? First, I'm going to provide some evidence of the impact, and my information will be primarily national. There's a set of bonus slides that we probably won't get to at the end of the talk. If you download the slides from my website later, you can get the bonus slides, and it's got some information on California, Orange County, and LA County as well. So we'll talk about evidence of the impact. We'll talk about government policy, primarily focusing on social and fiscal policy. And then we will talk about the nature of the recovery and what does the path forward look like. Okay, so let's turn to evidence of the impact. I always start with spending patterns, consumer spending, right? And this graph shows you trends in consumer spending since January 20, right? On January 20, that was the first US COVID case, and we've normalized that to 0. So deviations from this line down, that's a 10% decline in consumer spending, and that's a 10% increase, right? So things are going along okay in January, and we heard about China all the bad stuff that was happening there with respect to COVID, but figured it wasn't going to hurt us until we heard about Iran and Italy. We just said, oh, this really is going to be national in scope. And March Madness was canceled, NBA finals, Major League Baseball season was canceled, people stopped going out, stay-at-home orders were commonplace, and spending declined by more than 30%. We stayed down about 3 weeks, until Congress passed the CARES Act and the money really started flowing into the economy, at which point we started spending again. So things came back pretty quickly, but throughout most of the fall, there's been a slowing of the increase in spending. We would expect this to be up here somewhere, an increase of 3 to 4% over the course of the year, but we're stalled out, down about 3%, which isn't a really big deal. But it is a really big deal for certain parts of the economy. Right? We can look at different sectors. So restaurants and hotels, transportation, entertainment, and recreation. As we all might guess, right? These are sectors that rely on face-to-face contact, right? And although we have, largely eliminated our shelter-in-place orders, things have still not bounced back for these particular sectors. Right now, these are down very substantially. Entertainment and recreation down more than half, transportation almost half, restaurants and hotels more than a quarter. And the economy as a whole is down about 3%. So other sectors of the economy must be going up. And sure enough, right, sectors of the economy where you buy stuff instead of services, right? So grocery is up about 15%, and retail in general is up over 16%. Instead of going out to eat, people go to the grocery store. Instead of buying services and going to shows, people are buying stuff. A lot of that stuff is bicycles and other equipment for outdoor usage, which is really great. And hopefully will have long-lasting impact. The red line is grocery, and you can see grocery just popped up immediately. People stopped going out, started buying groceries. A bunch of this is, of course, toilet paper. We all remember that, right? And then things pretty much stabilized at about 15%. And so that's the ups and downs of consumer spending, which sort of begs the question of why do I focus on consumer spending? I focus on consumer spending because it's about 2/3 of the economy, right? Goods make up about 20% of everything that we buy. This is pre-pandemic, 2019, and services make up almost half of everything that we buy. Historically, consumption spending has been about 70% of the economy. So where consumption goes, so goes the economy, arguably. There are these other sectors that contribute as well, and government spending plays a pretty big role. So let's have a look at what's been going on with GDP and economic growth. So here's a chart that goes back to 1990. The blue bars indicate seasonally adjusted annual rates of growth in a particular quarter, right? So we go back here, there's a little recession at the end of the 80s, and pretty good growth through much of the 90s. And then the dot-com bubble bursts. And we can see more growth through the aughts until the housing market bubble burst, right? So this right here is the global financial crisis of a decade ago that I'm sure we all remember as just being horrible. We're losing 700,000 jobs a month, and GDP declines were significant, right? Well, and we recovered, and we got back into pretty steady economic growth until the pandemic hit, right? The pandemic hit, and it dropped first quarter growth by about 4%. And then we had a huge drop in second quarter growth of 2020 of more than about 35%. The Q3 2020, we had a pretty significant bounce back, right? A little bit smaller than the decline in Q2. And it was growth from a smaller base. So GDP remains really significantly down relative to where it was in the fourth quarter of 2019. We can look at how far we've come in terms of recovery, right? So this is Q4 of 2019, the drop in first quarter growth, which was a decline of about 1.3%. And then the further decline in Q2 took us down to a spot about 10% below where we were at the end of 2019. Significant recovery in Q3, but we remain down about 3.5% relative to 2019 Q4 and about 5% relative to trend, right? Because GDP would have grown over the course of 2020 were it not for the pandemic. So that's GDP still down about 5% relative to where we otherwise would have been. Early on, the CBO was projecting that it might take us until about 2029 to really recover where we otherwise would have been. Recovery of 2019 levels, probably not until 2022, maybe early 2023. All right. So we can look at job losses, right? As I alluded to earlier, right? This is the horrendous job loss of the global financial crisis, losing 700,000 jobs a month. We thought that was horrible until we got to April of this year. Right? April of this year, we experienced the single largest decline in employment in US recorded history, probably history, of 20.8 million jobs. Right? So this bar is truncated because 20 million would be somewhere down here. We started to bounce back again pretty quickly. In May and June, we had pretty good job growth. And in July, it started to taper off, and job growth has been slowing to the point where in December, job growth was actually negative. We lost 140,000 jobs in December, right? A reflection of the continued slowing and the uptick in the virus that we have experienced. Where were these job losses? Well, I showed you sectors that are not doing very well, and that's largely where they were. Leisure and hospitality actually lost about 500,000 jobs in December of last year, right? There were job gains elsewhere that offset these. That's why the job decline was just 140,000. Leisure and hospitality is down about 4 million jobs, or 23% throughout the course of 2020. food services and drinking place, gambling and recreation. Private education is down, I think private schools and colleges, as well as tutors. Government employment was down in December about 45,000, that largely driven by local government. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But government as an entire unit was down about 1.3 million jobs over the course of 2020. Black women and Latinas really took it on the chin, right? Virtually all of the net jobs that were lost in December fell on Black women and Latinas. Okay, I just foreshadowing some of the inequality that I'll be talking about as we go along. And we can look at the employment gap. This is a graph that, this is the global financial crisis, right? And the green line here, that was the long run trajectory in employment. And this is a forecast, the orange line here is a forecast of where we would have been had it not been for the global financial crisis. Right? Accurate, I'm not sure, but that's the best that we can do. Suggests that today we would have had about 176 million jobs in the economy, right? But we never really recovered from the global financial crisis. We were down about 20 million jobs before the onset of the pandemic at 152 million, right? And then we dropped that 20 plus million jobs, and we've since recovered. So we're down about 10 million jobs relative to where we were before the pandemic, but we're still down about 34 million jobs relative to where we had expected to be, right? So the last decade has been bad for jobs, and the pandemic also very bad for jobs. Year over year, we were down about 6.8% of employment in 2020. Right, so that's reflected, of course, in the unemployment statistics. I'm going to preface this part of the conversation by saying that during the pandemic, the unemployment rate has been probably the worst measure of how bad things are for a wide variety of reasons, not the least of which is that the BLS, through coding errors, got it wrong in the first couple of months. But as is its practice, it does not go back and revise. So the blue line here is the headline unemployment rate. That's what we all hear about every month. And it was down, around 3+%. And it took off up to about 15%. And it's now down, in December, it was down to about 6.7%, right? One measure that I like to look at is called the U6 unemployment rate. And this includes people who are sort of marginally attached to the labor force, kind of sort of looking, and people who are working part-time involuntarily. Right, so this unemployment rate was at about 7% before the pandemic, and it jumped up all the way to about 23%. Right, so this is in the neighborhood of the Great Depression back in the 30s, when unemployment is thought to have reached about 25%. Right, but we're recovering much more quickly than the Great Depression did, where that measure is still down now at about 11.7%. Right, again, if you're looking for a barometer for how the economy is doing, whether you look at U6 or the headline number, the unemployment rate is not helpful. And partly it's not helpful because people have left the labor force. And if you leave the labor force, you're obviously not employed, but you're also not counted in the unemployment rate, right? And about 2%, about 4% of workers have dropped out of the labor force, right? So the unemployment rate is probably at least 4 percentage points too low. There's been a disparate impact on men and women. Men have dropped out in slightly lower numbers than women. You can see here, this is September, right? So between August and September, when school started, a fair number of women dropped out of school out of work to take care of kids. And one important worry is the long-term implications for women. It seems that if they've dropped out to take care of the kids, they might continue doing that when this is over, rather than going back into the labor force. So the worry is an ongoing decline in labor force participation amongst women. There's also a racial differential, right? So this is the red line is labor force exits for white workers, and the green line is labor force exits for Black workers. This is a percent rather than just totals as the previous slide was, but among Black workers, more than 3% have dropped out of the labor force, whereas it's about 1 2/3% have dropped out for white workers. So there's been a disparate racial impact as well as by gender lines. Okay, let's turn now to policy efforts. Right? There have been 3 primary policy efforts: the social policy, social distancing, shelter in place, wear a mask, Fiscal policy is all of the spending. I hesitate to call it stimulus, but all of the spending that's been done by Congress. And then there's monetary policy, all of the work that the Federal Reserve has done to make sure that credit markets are still flowing freely, and that there isn't an enormous increase in the number of bankruptcies. I'll talk little about monetary policy and primarily about social policy and fiscal policy. So thinking about social policy, right? This takes us back to the whole conversation about flattening the curve, right? And this red area is the pattern of the number of cases of COVID that we might expect to experience if we didn't introduce protective measures, right? That would have ramped up pretty quickly to a pretty high level and then come down pretty quickly, perhaps because of herd immunity. Right? The problem with just kind of letting it rip and let the virus take its course is that we have healthcare capacity, right? If this is the amount of healthcare that we have available, everybody above this line is going to go without, which means that a lot of people will die who maybe wouldn't if we took protective measures. So we take protective measures. We flatten the curve by pushing down on this part up here, so it peaks at a much lower level. But that means that the number of cases is going to ramp up more slowly, peak at a further out point in time, and then continue for a while, right? Contrary to what a lot of people think, flattening the curve doesn't necessarily get us out of this faster. It may well take longer, right? But the upside is that we've got time, right? We've got time before our healthcare capacity is reached, right? And during that time, we ought to be able to increase our healthcare capacity so it can provide help to more people. We don't have to flatten the curve quite so much, right? So the benefit here, put this in economists' cost benefit terms, the benefit here is that we're saving lives. We're reducing overall, hopefully, the number of people who have some sort of long-term malady. And we could sort of back of the envelope value those lives saved and the malady foregone to the tune of about $5.3 trillion. We could go through all of that, but there's kind of a lack of time. Valuing lives saved and maladies foregone, about $5.3 trillion. When all of this got started, right, we could have looked at the decline in GDP associated with just letting her rip. This is just hypothetical. And then we can look at the decline in GDP with protective measures, right? So the difference is in those two is going to be this blue shaded area below the red one, right? And we see that the economy took a big hit really fast. That's reflected in this line. And the economy probably was hit much harder than it otherwise would have been. And it's going to take some time for it to come back, right? Early on, it was hypothesized that this blue area was going to be, roughly $1.3, $1.4 trillion. So if we have to forego $1.3 or $4 trillion worth of economic activity in order to save $5.3 trillion worth of lives, it's well worth doing. Right? So economists were of one mind that this was a really good idea. Right? The problem in doing all of this is that we didn't get things under control. Right? Back when we thought we were getting things under control, this is the new reported cases per day from the New York Times. Right, this was when I first started giving these talks and I'd present this material, this was the trajectory that we were looking at. Right, thinking, okay, things are getting better. We've made that sacrifice, and yes, closing down the economy was a good idea. Unfortunately, that trend, as I'm sure all of us are aware, has not continued. Right. We had Memorial Day weekend, people started going to the beach and socializing. So things in July 4 and cases increased significantly, started getting them back under control. And we have Labor Day, things start increasing, right? And then we have Thanksgiving, and we have Christmas and New Year's, right? And cases reached a peak, right, earlier this month and have been dropping in recent weeks, which is terrific. And I just hope that trend continues. Okay. We can also look at the number of deaths, right? Very high death rate early on. And even with the enormously increased number of cases, the death rate is elevated relative to early on, but not to the extent that all of the cases might indicate. So we've gotten better at treating COVID. It's also likely the case that it's a much younger cohort that is increasing the number of cases and are much less likely to die from COVID. Right, we are currently, I think that's as of the end of the day yesterday, less than 1,000 deaths away from 400,000 deaths in the United States due to COVID. Right. Okay, so as I mentioned, we did all of this and showed that it was a good idea to shut down, but we didn't do it very well. So we're in the position of having to shut down again, more protective measures, and maybe again and again, right? And so we've added on the economic costs here, right? Which makes it less worthwhile to shut down. We've also added on more deaths because we've added on more cases, right? So it's not clear that, had we known that we were going to do it so poorly, maybe we should have just let it rip. Unknown, and I'm not saying that had I gone back in time, I would have advocated for that, but we're doing a really bad job that looks like our current way of dealing with things is not being that effective. I want to point out that it's not as simple, right? You all know, opening up and shutting down is not as simple as flipping a light switch. In particular for small businesses, every time they have to shut down and open up, their financial position gets a little bit more precarious, right? So we'll talk more about small businesses. They're struggling, right? Here is small business, the percent that have closed since the onset of the pandemic. In professional and business services, it's down about 16%. Overall, down almost a third. And in leisure and hospitality, again, those services sectors down about half, right? The number of small businesses, or the share of small businesses that are not open, right? We don't know whether these and how many of these closures are temporary, how many are permanent. But I think what we do know is that even those that open up once the pandemic is over, their financial position is going to be more precarious and they're going to be more prone to closure. Right, so the economic effect of the pandemic will be felt long after everything is over. We can look at cases just quickly for California. It looks like we did things better with regard to Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's in California than nationwide, and our numbers are starting to come down significantly. I hope that continues. Number of deaths, again, as with the US, significantly elevated and trending down, and about 38,000 total deaths in the state of California. Okay, let's turn to fiscal policy. So here's the fiscal policy timeline. Again, I call it social insurance instead of stimulus, because it's really trying to get resources to people who need them more so than trying to actually grow the economy. All right, so what have we seen? Early on, we saw 4 different stimulus packages, 4 different social insurance packages, pardon me, that totaled about $3 trillion. We had the first CARES Act. This was really got markets turning around, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then it was clear that we needed more support for small firms, COVID testing, and we got phase 2 of the CARES Act. But that was April 24, a very long time before we got any additional effort from the federal government, right? And we can talk about the new fiscal package, the $900 billion package that was recently passed. What's in it? Right, $600 checks to individuals, may soon be $2,000. I'll talk about that more in a minute when I talk about what incoming President Biden has talked about. Increased unemployment benefits through March up to $300. There's a big concern that these additional unemployment benefits are causing people not to go out and get jobs. Economists have looked very hard to find evidence of that, right? It was $600 additional dollars last year. We found no evidence that it was deterring people from going out and finding jobs. I think people realize that if they can find a job, they ought to grab it. It also includes $284 billion additional in the Paycheck Protection Program. $82 billion for schools and universities, which is really far too little when you think about all of the schools and universities that we have nationwide. $68 billion for vaccine distribution, $25 billion for rental assistance. It could be that rental arrears amount to about $70 billion. So that's kind of scratching the surface. And $93 billion in other support for other things. Right. So there was an enormous fiscal policy gap between April and December. I maintain that the unemployment payments on their own were not sufficient. Low-wage workers are in trouble. Small businesses are struggling. Renters can't pay rent. Lines at food banks are getting longer. States and local governments are slashing budgets. Right. So that's all stuff that happened during the fiscal policy gap. Some of it was filled in by the $900 billion. Other of it not. What's still missing? I think real help to households, right? I think most of us are aware that $600 just isn't going to go very far, especially if you're 3, 4, 5, 6 months behind in paying your rent. That's going to eat it up in a hurry. State and local government support, more on that in a minute. Real support for renters, as I mentioned, could be $70 billion of rental arrears at this point. I mean, we really need better targeted small business support and support for independent contractors. All that support has been very difficult to get and probably woefully too little. All right, so a little bit more evidence on some of this. So this is, remember the graph that I showed you for employment early on? This is similar. There's the green that was long-term trend, red is actual, and this was our forecast. So before the global financial crisis, I would have expected state and local government employment to be about 22 million, right? Prior to the pandemic, it was just 20 million, and now it's down to about 18.5 million, right? So state and local employment has dropped by 1.4 million. And that's really where the rubber hits the road for a lot of us, right? Police and fire, other protective services, education services, right? We rely pretty heavily on state and local governments for providing those services. Without more aid from the federal government, we are going to be experiencing dramatic cuts in state and local government services. I mentioned more directed aid towards small businesses, right? So this is a survey of small businesses. In total, 70% of respondents were using some form of financial support to get their business through, right? And only about 30% of those got a PPP loan. About almost 30% put more money on a personal credit card or a business credit card. Over here, none of these. I assume that this is a lot of friends and family loans. All right, so all of this indicates that they're taking on more debt, which goes to the financially precarious position of small businesses at the end of this. Right, that brings us to the Biden proposal. Oops, that question mark was supposed to come in later, but I'll just go ahead and address it. Right, these are the major elements. There's about $200 billion of other policy changes in there. But he was going to increase unemployment insurance supplement to $400 a week from $300 and extend the benefits from March through September at a cost of about $350 billion. Extending it through September, I wholly support. I'm not sure that raising it to $400 a week is really necessary or the best use of funds. But this seems to be the way that Congress wants to do it, just an initial additional lump sum for everybody, regardless of what your pre-pandemic wages were. They want to provide an additional $1,400 per person to bring the total up to $2,000. Provide aid to state and local governments. Here is about $350 billion. That will do a lot to help state and local governments. California actually in a pretty good position statewide, local governments a little bit less so. And then there's about $30 billion down here to provide rental and small landlord assistance. Right. Again, that's 30 plus the 25. So we're now at about 55 billion out of the suggested 70 billion in which renters are in arrears. So this is some good steps forward. I'm not sure that all of it is what I would do. There's some additional assistance here for parents. I think that's great. And a lot more money for getting the vaccine out, which is really, really how we're going to get the economy back on track. All right, so some thoughts about the path forward. What kind of a recovery is it going to be? Well, our president for One Day More has been talking about a V-shaped recovery. I don't think that's what we're going to have at the end of the day, or a K-shaped recovery. Right, so what's a K-shaped recovery? Let's first talk about a V-shaped recovery. We're not going to have it because the aggregate data looked good because of the CARES Act, and that buoyed Q3 GDP. I think Q4 GDP will probably come in a little bit negative. The K-shaped, so we're not going to get a V. We're going to go up and then stall out. And I really prefer to think of it as the Nike swoosh. We're coming down fast, going up, but not going to reach where we were for some time yet. Q3 looks really good because we bought it through the CARES Act, which was a good thing, but it doesn't look good everywhere. At the bottom part of the K, the top part is those at the upper part of the income distribution are doing pretty well. Those at the bottom part of the income distribution are the lower part of the K, right? So the lower part of the K, employment of low-income workers. I'll show you evidence that that's down much more than high-income workers. Small firms I've talked about, right? The hardest hit sectors are really, really doing badly. State and local governments, women and minorities are the hardest hit in terms of both wage and unemployment impacts. Right? Who's doing well? Right? Well, we go and look at the stock market. right? Why is the stock market doing very well? A variety of different explanations. One is that there's simply nowhere else to put your money and get any sort of a return, which is largely true. Two is that there's a lot of industry consolidation. A lot of small businesses are going under, so the money that would have been spent at small businesses is now getting spent at large businesses, those that are listed on the stock exchange. And we could go on and on, but in the absence of time, we'll move on. Right, so the blue line here, that's the S&P 500. Right, it's up nearly 20% relative to where it was at its peak on February 19. And the blue line here is the Dow. Right, it's also up at an all-time high. Right, so the stock markets are doing really well. Another part of the explanation for why stock markets are doing pretty well, in particular for the S&P 500. Here we've got the top 10 performing stocks in the S&P. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, Alphabet, Class A and Class C, right? So all 6 of these have in common that they are tech stocks, right? Then we get Berkshire Hathaway, Johnson & Johnson, Visa, Procter & Gamble. Right? So if we take those 10 stocks, this is the blue line. And those 10 stocks are really what's driving growth in the S&P. The remaining 490 stocks are collectively down below where they were at the beginning of this year. Right, so it's really just a small set of high flyers. Jeff Bezos is closing in on $1 trillion in wealth. I think actually Elon Musk overtook just Jeff Bezos for the richest person in the world. So the top is doing quite well. Thank you very much. The bottom, really not so much. Right, so here we have, this is a similar graph to the one I put up for consumer spending, but it has to do instead with different parts of the labor force. So the red is high wage, those who are making more than 60K, mid wage, those between 27 and 60K, and low wage, those making less than $27,000 a year. Right, and you can see that the vast majority of the unemployment decline. So that's the segment of the labor force that is really taking it on the chin. And again, we haven't seen any growth in their employment since the middle of summer. And it's been a long, hard path for those in low wage jobs, right? Very often people facing jobs. Okay, so what sort of structural changes are we likely to see? And I like to say that the pandemic has been an accelerant rather than a change agent. That is to say that it has taken trends that were already pre-existing in the economy and caused them to explode, right? So in retail, right, we've all been talking for a long time about the death of brick and mortar, right? Well, I think brick and mortar took a hit during the pandemic from which it will never recover. Lots more people are comfortable using Amazon and other online. Telecommuting, right? There's a trend in that direction. Well, we've had a grand experiment in telecommuting that at the end of the day, you know, even I think Twitter will probably have employees going back to the office. But at the end of the day, a lot more people will be telecommuting, maybe only going into the office a couple of days a week. Telehealth we have another grand experiment in telehealth, and I'll be surprised if we go back to the way that things were. I really hope that we don't, because I've spent an awful lot of time in doctors' waiting rooms, and I'd rather not do that anymore. Business travel, maybe not so much of an accelerant. This might be change, but business travel is way, way, way down during the pandemic, of course. And I think, you know, we're all getting very proficient with Zoom. And, you know, how much of that will continue in the wake of the pandemic? I don't know, but I would guess that it's going to be down for quite some time. Wealth concentration, you know, since the dot-com era, wealth is becoming dramatically increasingly concentrated in the United States. That's continued. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. Industry concentration, right? That's a part of why the stock market is doing so well, is that industries are concentrating. The small part of it and small firms are dropping out, and the large are continuing. Automation, there has been a significant amount of automation. Well, if having workers in is actually more difficult now because of COVID. So there have been big investments in labor saving technologies. And then in this playoff season, NFL scoring. There's an acceleration of NFL scoring this year, right? I never would have guessed, but there was an upward trend in scoring average points per game per team. There was an upward trend, and this was 2019. And here's 2020, right? Well, it turns out that crowd noise matters a lot more for offense than it does for defense, right? So we're getting much more scoring. Sorry, just a moment of levity for those who care about the NFL. All right, there is some good news. The good news is that there were no short-run macroeconomic problems at the start of the crisis, right? So the only concern is how quickly do we get things back to the way that they were, and how permanent are all the temporary disruptions that we're seeing. At this point, we really don't know, but hopefully a lot of the temporary disruptions will not become permanent. Things are not as bad as they could be. The Federal Reserve prevented collapse in financial markets. Congress and the White House prevented complete collapse in labor and productive markets. And savings are off the charts. Right? We had a savings rate of about 30% a couple of quarters ago, which we haven't seen perhaps ever in the United States. So what that means is that there is a bunch of cash sitting out there in reserve. And hopefully when this is all over, that cash will come from the sideline into play, and that will increase consumer spending dramatically, and that will help with the economic bounce back. Causes for concern, right? Economic inequality was an important trend before the pandemic, and it's worsening at, again, an accelerated rate. And state and local governments, I really hope that the package that Biden passes will have a lot of money for state and local governments. And eviction and foreclosure moratoria. They're shifting burdens to the future. We should be dealing with landlords' inability to pay their mortgage rather than renters' ability to pay their rent. So we're going to see some dislocation that comes from that down the road. Just a few notes in conclusion. All right, this is basically a health crisis with huge macroeconomic implications, enormous built-in inequities. Structural changes are going to be very significant, but again, just an acceleration of changes that were going on anyway. GDP likely contract between 3% and 5% in 2020. Hopefully positive growth will return in 2021, perhaps not in the first quarter, but hopefully second, third, and fourth quarters will overwhelm what happened in the first quarter. Government spending induced growth in Q3. That's why we got all of that growth. We bought it again, stopped in Q4, so we got declines. It's going to be, hopefully an accelerant in Q1, but certainly throughout the rest of 2021. Policy gap created an enormous amount of hardship. Very disappointing that our Congress let that happen. And finally, the only way to get the economy back is to get the pandemic under control. Right? We're going to be in this state of limbo so long as cases are elevated. So hopefully we can accelerate the pace at which we get the vaccine out and get the public back into good physical health, and then the economy will come back very quickly. Okay, that's what I have. Here is some information about need. I will send this information to Scott, who will hopefully forward it to the rest of you. But for now, I'm going to stop sharing and I hope that you're all still there. And I'll take any questions that you might have.
So if everybody would put in the Q&A, if you have any questions for Dr. Haveman, I'll read them off for him. Thanks again. Very informative, lots to digest. Again, I appreciate everyone coming on board today. Hopefully we'll have another panel here or a webinar coming in March that will intrigue you as much as this one did for me. So if anybody has any questions, either raise your hand or we have the Q&A box at the bottom. Doesn't look like we have too much right now, Doctor.
Well, and then let me apologize for being a fire hose. I imagine people are sitting to digest it.
So we'll leave it open to about another minute. If there's any questions, please type in. No. Okay.
Any questions? Any thoughts that your perception of what I've talked about is different from mine? I'd love to hear that.
Again, I'll disseminate all of his information to everyone that is on this panel and our RMA board, so that you have the opportunity to reach out directly to him. Okay. All right. We have one. What's included in the bonus slides?
Oh,
Harry.
That's included in the bonus slides. Well, yeah. You'll have to go to my website and download them. But there's other information about monetary policy. There's information about the California economy more specifically. So I've got all of the consumer spending graphs that I had for the United States. I've got that for California. There's some information about real estate markets in Orange County and Los Angeles County. Other things that hopefully you'll find some interest.
Good. So another one just came in. With vaccines slowly coming in, what are your comments on economic growth because of that?
Well, I think that we are making an enormous mistake in not rolling it out more quickly. The vaccines, my understanding is that we've been actually underselling the efficacy and the importance of the vaccines. So, the faster we can get it out, the faster we can get critical mass inoculated, the faster the economy can start to bounce back. Right. Hopefully, with the change in administration, we will have a different approach to disseminating the vaccines. But that's in addition to, as well as everybody putting on masks more often than we have been, getting the vaccines out and into people's arms just as quickly as possible. That's the path. That's the first step, the most important step in the path forward and towards bringing the economy back.
Excellent. Can you comment on the longer-term impact to our kids and grandkids with the explosion of the deficit via printing money?
Yes. Yes. So for those of you who are looking at the list of topics that we had early on, one of them is on the federal debt, because that is sort of a natural follow-on question to what I've just been presenting. We're going to end up, Congress is going to end up spending in excess of $5 trillion, maybe $6 trillion. That will balloon the debt without question. The debt was already going to balloon. Before this, we were at debt was at about 80% of GDP. It was expected to exceed 100% of GDP by 2050. I'm sorry, 180% of GDP by 2050. So we had structural spending problems before this. With the pandemic, we're clearly going to go above 100% of GDP by the end of this year. That'll come down a little bit in subsequent years, but we're going to get up over 220, 230% of GDP by the year 2050. And the question is, how much does that matter? It matters from my perspective, because there is some point of government debt where bond markets will start to get jittery, at which point interest rates will go up. And of course, then the debt will balloon and interest rates will go up more, and this cascading events of economic crisis around the country. We don't know where that will happen, right? Is 200% of GDP the magic number? Is it 500% of GDP? I just don't know. So the pandemic is definitely adding to our debt woes. Is it a serious concern for our kids? I don't think so, for reasons that are pretty complicated. So long as we have GDP growth, we can kind of grow our way out of this. I'm also very hopeful that this dramatic run-up in the debt will cause our policymakers to get serious about it. Right. And if they get serious about it and we can solve some of the structural problems, I know President Biden would like to increase payroll taxes on those making $400,000 a year or more. I think that would help a lot for our debt problem going forward. If we can get our healthcare costs under control. Those are really the two. So the big three items that had us going up to 180% of GDP to begin with were Social Security, healthcare costs for the government, and interest servicing the debt. Right. So if we can get those two, the first two, under control, then perhaps this spending won't have the long-lasting impact that it might. Right. But that relies on our members of Congress really coming down and reaching consensus on how to solve those great big problems, the likelihood of which I'm not very optimistic about.
We have a lot of bankers on this. So one question here is, can you comment on distressed commercial credits at all? Could this be leading to a dam break scenario?
So quite possibly. I will confess not to be an expert in that, but I think that is a real risk. And the Federal Reserve has been backstopping a lot of those markets. Hopefully that backstopping will continue, so we won't get a bursting of the dam. But people were worried about it going into the pandemic, and the pandemic has surely only made things worse. So it's definitely on the top 10 list of worries, I would say. Let me put one down at the bottom of the top 10 list, and that is inflation, right? I usually get a question about inflation and how much do I worry about it. when I say is down, it's about number 10 on my list of significant worries. We've got, people dying and the debt and those other things are bigger worries than inflation. We didn't see it after a phenomenal run up in spending and liquidity in the wake of the global financial crisis. And I expect that we won't really see it in the wake of all of this.
Excellent. One last question. Looks like, can you forecast what would have happened if the Trump administration had taken a much more aggressive / organized approach towards COVID-19?
Hard to forecast because, we can look to other countries that took a much more coordinated, less political approach. Take Germany and some other European countries, and they seem to be getting things under control, but they too probably came back too soon. People started going out too soon. I think that, even had we done things better, we would be having difficulty now because it's not uncommon globally. But our levels of cases, I think, would have been so much lower. And hopefully we would have responded to upticks more strongly and not let it get out of hand the way that we have. So, can I forecast what the number of deaths would have been? I've heard people say that it for sure would have been less than 200,000 instead of the 400,000 that we're experiencing had we taken it, more seriously and acted more appropriately and responsibly.
Well, that's all the questions we have. Thank you again, Dr. Haveman. This was really informative and in 1 hour or less. So again, I'll disseminate some of the information that we do have. I'd like to thank again our sponsors for this event, Marsha McClellan and also Music Peeler. And look forward to seeing you guys in March. We'll announce that soon, our next panel on webinar. And thanks again for attending. Appreciate it, everybody.